Our story starts off once again on the outskirts of Silent Hill, this time in a rundown bathroom at a rest stop near Toluca Lake. James, our main protagonist, hears a voiceover of his deceased wife. The voiceover is brought to you by a letter that he received with her name on it. Named Mary. The weird thing is, Mary, James's wife, has been dead for 3 years from an unknown disease. Mary said in her note to meet at their special place. James, thinking that this is a nearby park, heads off down the middle and through the woods to find his dead wife he goes. Hearing all matters of creepy-ass sounds coming from the said woods around him, James comes to a seemingly empty graveyard until he runs into a literal red flag of a person. Her name is Angela, but for right now we're just going to call her Red Flag. So James asks how to get to the nearby town of Silent Hill, and Red Flag tells him that there's only one road and there's a possibility that things are dangerous. This is the biggest understatement ever. James dismisses Red Flag like a boss and continues stating that he doesn't really care if it's dangerous or not. It's nice to actually play as someone who's kind of brave and doesn't faint out like a little bitch every 15 minutes. Like in the first game. James goes a long way around and somehow never comes across a down road or a blocked path until he hears a small red radio blaring static nearby. As we all know, static means to put your brown pants on. Speaking of brown pants, this creature stands up and begins to attack James. Instead of running away or fading out, he rips a pipe off the wall and proceeds to exorcise the demon in the drain tunnel, and after coming out the other side with his unstained brown pants, James hears the voice of his wife coming through the broken static of the radio. James decides to keep the radio, thinking it might come in handy somehow later. After walking around aimlessly and beating the shit out of more monsters, James finds an apartment key. Apparently Silent Hill only has one apartment building, so James decides to go visit it. I guess. The apartment is dark as shit, and almost right away, James finds a clip-on flashlight and says, "Awesome, free flashlight." Right after, James gets attacked by two south halves. After literally beating the pair of legs to death, you come across a key you need on the other side of some bars. After nearly getting said key, a bratty kid comes out and kicks the key out of the way and stomps on James's hand, reminding us all why wearing a condom is so important. After running through the halls of the apartment building, this pants-shitting moment happens. James gathers by the noise coming from the north of his current position. After reaching the apartment, you see a TV covered in blood with nothing but static on it. There's a man sitting on the chair with the insides of his head on the outside. I guess we can all call this guy number one on our list, Mystery Couch Guy. After using a nearby clock key and setting the clock to 9:09, you hear a click and are able to push the giant clock to the side and access the secret room, finding a fire escape key and a much needed handgun. After exploring the apartment some more, you come across a fan favorite monster, Pyramid Head, violating another southern half monster. After beating, well, we're just gonna say beating, hugging viciously a monster, James finds his way into a nearby closet. James, not wanting Pyramid Head to be his next date, uses his gun and unloads all his extra shots into Pyramid Head, giving him a few extra holes to let his perviness out. Pyramid Head just walks away, even though later on we see him shrug off bullets like he does dates. After leaving the safety of the closet, James comes across a frat boy blowing chunks into a nearby toilet. The frat boy introduces himself as Eddie, while he's still praying to the porcelain god. After a short conversation, James leaves Eddie to destroying that poor toilet. As he finds the door nearby, uses the fire escape exit key, James finds that there's no fire exit, just a window, and the building next door is close enough for him to jump into the window. Finding a dirtier, more rundown building on the inside, and after a short bout of exploring, James comes across Red Flag in a nearby room laying on a dirty-ass floor. After moping around and showing that she has some mental illnesses, shocker, James sees that she's holding a knife. Crazy lady gets a little bit more crazy, and James figures out that Red Flag's mother lives in town by process of elimination. Red Flag, clearly upset, and clearly confused, stands up, saying that she needs to find her mama. James asks about the knife, since Red Flag is showing some suicidal actions and thoughts. Red Flag offers to give the knife willingly, but when James goes to grab it, she freaks out and almost stabs him with it, before quickly apologizing, leaving the knife on the table and exiting. And it leaves us to carry the knife for almost the rest of the game, using up valuable inventory space for no reason at all. James leaves and comes across Pyramid Head again, molesting another poor monster. James begins to fight with the horny monster, firing shot after shot into it, with no clear sign of causing any real damage, because the power of boners, I guess. A siren begins to blare, and Pyramid Head retreats down a flooded staircase. With a quick turn of a valve, James drains that water and gives chase to the weirdly horny, molesty monster. The staircase leads outside into the foggy, deserted streets of Silent Hill. James runs into Little Hand Stomper herself, humming while she sits on a wall. After James tries to get to know her a little bit, the little brat is holding a letter, and after James asks about it, the little girl gets spooked, saying that James never truly loved Mary. James, taken back, asks the little girl how she knows Mary's name, as she's hopping over the wall and out of sight. James gives chase, and instead of finding the little girl, he finds a big blonde girl named Maria. It's noted that Maria has a striking resemblance to Mary, James's wife, with, in his words, only her hair and clothes being different. James explains why he's here in Silent Hill for the 5th time in 5 minutes, and goes to leave, but Maria convinces James to take her along with him. After walking around with Maria, the pair comes to a bowling alley. James is about to go in when Maria says that she'll stay outside because, just like everybody else, after playing Grand Theft Auto 4, she hates bowling.
Nico, it's Roman. Let's go bowling.
James enters the bowling alley to find the blonde brat questioning Eddie, who's eating a pizza for some reason. She asks why Eddie is running from the police, and he denies it, continuing to eat his pizza. The child runs when she hears James enter. Eddie says her name is Laura, and after James asks Eddie to help him stop her and ask her some questions, Eddie would rather sit and eat his pizza. After exiting, Maria says that Laura outran her, and that the two come to a dead end where Laura has seemingly slipped between two buildings. Maria uses her Jill Master unlocking set to open a nearby door, and James and Maria find their way through a dimly lit building and down some stairs, where they see Laura running into a nearby hospital. After beating the crap out of some dirty faceless nurses and some double souths, Maria, and who hasn't done dick up until this point, except unlock a door, she says she needs to rest in a nearby room, that she drank too much last night and has a hangover. James, ever the gentleman, leaves Maria in the dirty-ass hospital bed to go find Laura. After free roaming around a little bit in the hospital, James finds himself on the roof, and for some reason, Pyramid Head comes out of seemingly nowhere and knocks James through a rusty gate. After taking a gravity-induced nap, James wakes up and re-enters the hospital. James finds a box containing a few hairs, and after using the hairs like MacGyver, James gets an elevator key from a shower drain. I don't understand it either. After using the elevator key, you go to the first floor and find Laura playing in the dark with some teddy bears. After a short conversation, James asks how she knows Mary. Laura says that she was friends with Mary, and they met while they were in the hospital last year. James loses his temper for the second time, calling Laura a liar. After talking to Laura some more, James convinces Laura to come with him, and Laura convinces James that she left behind a letter from Mary and needs to go get it. Not sensing that this brat is about to do something bratty, James falls for the 8-year-old's trap, hook, line, and sinker. Laura locks James in a room with two monsters swinging from the ceiling. James is pounding on the door trying to get Laura to open it, Laura only calling him a fart face for his trouble. James unloads some vitamin lead into these swinging monsters and the siren begins to blare. And the monsters seem to slowly become more and more vulnerable. James kills them and reality seems to shift around him. No, he doesn't lose consciousness, because he's not a little bitch baby like Harry, but he does seem to envision himself laying in a gurney that's getting ushered down a hall, after which reality seems to snap back and James is in a completely different room. After some exploring, James pushes a bookshelf out of the way. Maria finds James, and for the 7th time, James mistakes Maria for Mary. Mary gets mad at James for leaving her, even though she asked him to, and I don't know why that would be. Mary joins James again, and they go into an elevator where James's broken radio begins to play a weirdly creepy game show, stating that James is the contestant, and the show is called Trick or Treat. The host of this weird radio show asks 3 seemingly random questions, asking the name of the amusement park in Silent Hill, the name of a serial killer, and the name of a road. Maria saying what everybody's thinking, with a simple, "What the hell is that?" After coming to a stop and finding only a lead ring and a puzzle box, if you enter in the right answers that the radio host questioned you about, you're rewarded with shotgun shells and some health items. You find a cool 3D painting on the door with the lead ring. You can use that to unlock the door. After walking down many steps and running through what seems like to be a maze in the basement, James enters an elevator, and Maria is seemingly too slow, and Pyramid Head seems to kill her. Maria dies via a stab in the back, or so it would seem. We even get some moody, somber music, seeming to seal the deal, but Maria ain't gonna go on the kill count just yet. You'll find out later. James finds a key and a map with a poem written on it, signaling him to go to a certain point on the map. After exiting, Silent Hill is covered in total darkness, and after getting to the point on the map, James finds a wrench and another note calling him a fool and sending him to a plot of dirt that he uncovers a metal box. The metal box is locked by some bolts, and after using the wrench, James finds an old bronze key inside. After walking down some steps, like for an eternity, you would think the devil himself would be at the end waiting for James, but no, instead he only comes to this door, and inside is a dark hole in the ground that James says screw it and jumps down into. This is a very long drop, and at the bottom it seems like a really creepy old well, like the Ring or something. But after tapping around in the dark, James finds that there is a small point of this wall that seems hollow. And after breaking it, a door is revealed, and the door leads through a dark, gross sewer-like area, which leads into another seemingly long drop farther into hell-esque Silent Hill. We somehow find Eddie here, who has seemingly gone off the deep end, and also seemingly kills a person in this area, showing only a bloody bits of human remains. So we'll call this leftover meatloaf of a human being number 2, I guess. Eddie makes a quick exit, and James follows, making his way through the dark hallways and down another deep hole. And yet another deep hole. I think at this point, he's going to come out on the other side of the planet, so why not go down yet another deep dark hole? After taking an elevator, you guessed it, down, we find some extra ammo and health items, letting us gamers know that there is a boss fight coming up really soon. After coming to and finding a puzzle in the form of a thwomp from Mario Kart, and spinning up, down, left, right, BA start, we come to our favorite character from West Side Story. Locked behind bars, she seems confused when James asks how she survived. She flirts with James and says she can't do anything behind these bars. James leaves the room with blue balls and tries to find a way to get to Maria and set her free. After some more searching, James comes across Red Flag again. This time she's hunkered down in a creepy room with, well, let's say suggestive wall design. After being crazy again, we see that she calls this monster in the corner that looks like 2 people banging on a table her papa. After filling the freaky table with a few pounds of lead, it falls to the floor, and Red Flag Angela kicks the living shit out of it and slams an old TV on it just to make sure it's dead. Red Flag accuses James of Me Tooing and leaves the room in a non-graceful manner of her someone who just got their bacon saved, tossing one more insult to James, saying that he left his wife for someone else before she makes her exit. James follows Red Flag, somehow missing her, but he comes to her room finding Maria covered in blood and seemingly dead again, but she won't go on the count now either. James is upset, seeing someone die seemingly for the second time today, and for the second time we have to listen to somber music as we walk around in the darkness sulking for another 5 minutes. I swear, the longer and longer this game goes on, the more you gotta turn the brightness up, just to see anything that's more than 5 feet in front of you. Anyway, after stumbling around in the darkness for 2 more clicks of brightness on the setting, we come across Crazy Eddie again, and I see what appears to be 5 bodies of random people seemingly killed by Eddie in these little quick cuts. I don't know who the hell was directing this little crazy camera action, but it gives me a freaking headache. I guess that brings our total up to 7 at this point. Eddie goes on a rant about how he was bullied and won't take shit anymore from anybody. James asks Eddie if he's finally gone nuts, and Eddie now thinks James is making fun of him, and now sees him as a threat, and starts to shoot James, his first shot landing in James's shoulder. James shrugs off this gunshot, way better than Harry ever did, and returns fire at Eddie, making him flee deeper into the meat locker. After a short back and forth, you get into another shootout with Eddie after a small shootout in a game with zero cover or a game design geared towards enemies that shoot back. We turn Eddie into some Swiss cheese. He falls back and becomes another piece of meat in this meat locker, and also becomes another number on our count. Number 8 to be exact. James gets butthurt over killing a human, and it's kind of ironic after we learn what James did later. James leaves the meat locker, and somehow after falling halfway to hell, we are somehow on the surface level with the lake. After entering a rowboat, we as the player are left to reflect on all the events that led up to this point in the game. We literally row ourselves into the final act of this game. After rowing our boat for what seems like a really, really long time, we finally reach the docks outside the fabled Lakeview Hotel. We enter in, and to surprise, surprise, it's empty, and only a map that has some writing on it to the room that you and your wife Mary spent time together in 3 years ago. Along with that, James finds a videotape and a can opener for some reason. James finds a fish key in the dining room, and the bratty little Laura playing a single scary note on the piano. She asks James if he found Mary yet, and after a short conversation, Laura gives James a letter somehow left to her by Mary, saying a tearful and sorrowful goodbye, saying how she was going to adopt her, and all this and that, and it was going to be for her 7th birthday, and James reads it and asks how old Laura is. Laura replies that she turned 8 last week. James, doing some quick math, now knows that there's no way possible that Mary could have died 3 years ago. Laura says there was another letter and gets upset, noting that she dropped it. So she quickly runs out the front door off to find this 3rd letter that Mary supposedly wrote to her. James continues on without her as he sees that she's been fine by herself and he has some wife finding to do. James enters the room that he rented with his wife, popping in the videotape in the VCR, and in the video, his wife says how happy she is, and how she wants to return one day before going into a coughing fit. The video cuts in and out of static showing Mary in the hospital before showing James at her bedside and seemingly attacking her before it cuts off into static. James sits in the chair in disbelief as he apparently didn't remember that he killed his wife. Laura enters the room and asks if James found Mary. James reveals to Laura that Mary is gone, that she's dead. Laura asks if Mary died because she was sick, and James seemingly comes clean, saying only, "No, I killed her." Laura has a temper tantrum, hitting James and telling him that she hates him. James gives no detail to this little girl wanting to know about Mary. He only says he's sorry and that Mary, the Mary that Laura knows, isn't here. James says sorry to Laura one more time before she leaves the room in a huff. James sits and sulks again for a little while with the same somber music playing. Though his little red radio begins to blare, and through the static, Mary calls James again, telling him that she's waiting nearby. James exits the room and heads out into the hotel, covered in darkness and is now dripping wet, as if it rapidly aged in the time he spent in the room. James comes across the burning stairwell and sees Red Flag. After talking for a bit, Red Flag asks for her knife back, and James says no. After returning upstairs, as the fire starts to take over the staircase, in a last-ditch effort to save Red Flag, James asks her to come with him, and that it's getting hotter as the fire starts to grow. She says only, "You see it too. It's like this all the time for me." These are the last words we hear her say to James before seemingly walking up the burning staircase to her presumed death. So Angela, Miss Red Flag herself, will become number 9 on our kill count via death from an imaginary fire. James leaves her to her fate and walks up for seemingly the first time in a long time, coming to a dark-ass room and finding Maria with 2 pyramid heads. And for seemingly the 3rd time in 30 minutes, Maria is killed, but since she isn't seen again after this, Maria becomes number 10 on our kill count. James has some sort of inner revelation and says he no longer feels the need to be punished and wants to end this all once and for all. He fights the 2 pointy heads, and James walks off down the hallway. It's a really long hallway. The entire time his wife Mary is calling herself a monster and pushing him away. It's just a conversation, but she says that between the meds and the illness, she actually feels like she's turning into a real monster. James is part of the voiceover. He seems dumbfounded and hurt and still continues to want to be there with her, but he also hates himself for hating her, but he loves her, and he hates the things that are like this. And it's fully revealed that why James has this guilt is that he used a pillow to smother his wife to death while she slept. He was feeling a mixture of emotions, and he didn't want to see her suffer. He loved her, but he also hated her for being sick. He wanted her and him to have their life back together. He wanted to be done with it. He wanted her to be over with suffering, and basically what it comes down to is all the monsters that he's been fighting and seeing up to this point, everything that he's been through, is basically a physical manifestation of all his emotions he's felt since doing what he's done to his wife. And we all know how Silent Hill loves to feed off the pain and suffering of others. James makes his way to the top of the hotel to face the physical form of all his guilt and all his pain. Of course, it's in the form of Mary. He calls Mary by name. Mary corrects him, saying, "Why do you keep making that mistake?" Mary is now seemingly Maria, even though Maria was Maria, and this whole name confusing thing keeps going on for a little bit more. James actually says that he doesn't need either one of them anymore, Mary or Maria. And after coming to this realization that this nightmare creature has been feeding off of James, realizes that her tricks aren't going to work anymore, turns and morphs into a more nightmarish, hellish creature version of his wife. Even though she doesn't really look like his wife anymore. It's an upside down monster in a cage. But this is the final showdown. After dumping all your remaining ammo and getting attacked by Batman's namesake, Mary, or the nightmare form of her, falls to the ground, and with one final strike, James puts an end to his walking nightmare. We are shown James talking to Mary as she lay in her deathbed. She says that she wanted to die and for the pain to end, and James comes to terms with what he did to her, and he apologizes one more time. Mary accepts it, asking him to do one more favor for her. And the favor that Mary wants James to do is to just forgive himself, start over, live his life the best he can. And the game ends with the long version of Mary's letter, as we count Mary as our number 11 on the kill count. The letter comes to an end, and we see Laura and James leaving Silent Hill together, off to start a new life, free of guilt and pain. I gotta say, this version of the story, because there was Silent Hill 1, the story kind of bounces all around, and it doesn't really make much sense. This story doesn't really make much sense either, but for a 2001 game that was originally made in Japanese, transferred over to English, the story, to me anyway, is a lot easier to follow. The reason why he keeps confusing Maria and Mary, because I guess they look alike, but their hair and clothes are different. I don't know, it's a little bit strange, but overall, I have to say that of all the Silent Hill games, Silent Hill 2 is my favorite. But with all that said, next week we're going to be doing Silent Hill 3. But if you like videos like this, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys in this one. Take care, have a good weekend, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one. And happy Halloween.